Jazz. Have you ever looked into the eyes of someone you trusted with your whole heart and realized they were looking right through you? Jazz. People always say betrayal hurts because it comes from someone you love. I used to think that sounded dramatic. I thought real love could survive misunderstandings. Jazz. I believed honesty always found its way back. I was wrong. The night everything changed didn't begin with shouting. There wasn't a dramatic argument or a broken window. There wasn't even a warning. Jazz. It started with silence. The kind of silence that feels heavier than words. The kind that slowly creeps into your chest until you can barely breathe. That Friday evening looked ordinary. Jazz. Rain tapped softly against my apartment window while I waited for Daniel to come home. The pasta was almost ready. His favorite movie was already playing on the television. Jazz. I even lit 2 candles because he had been working late all week, and I wanted him to feel appreciated. Looking back now, I wish I had noticed the signs. Maybe I did. Jazz. Maybe I just refused to believe them. Daniel had been distant for months. His smile wasn't the same. His hugs felt shorter. His phone never left his hand. Every time I asked if something was wrong, Jazz, he smiled, kissed my forehead, and told me I was imagining things. You worry too much, he always said. And because I loved him, I believed him. Love has a strange way of making excuses for people. Jazz. You convince yourself they're tired. You tell yourself work is stressful. You blame yourself for asking too many questions. Little by little, you stop trusting your own instincts. Jazz. That was exactly what happened to me. At 7:30 I checked my phone. No message at 8 o'clock. Still nothing. By 9 dinner had gone cold. I picked up my phone to call him, but before I could press his name, a text appeared. Running late. Big meeting. Don't wait up. Just 9 simple words. 9 words that almost fooled me, almost. Jazz. Something inside me whispered that this time was different. I can't explain it. Maybe it was the emptiness of the apartment. Maybe it was the way his message sounded copied and rushed. Jazz. Or maybe my heart already knew the truth before my mind was ready to accept it. I walked to the kitchen and turned off the stove. The candles kept burning. Their small flames danced in the quiet room. Jazz. Almost mocking the hope I was still holding on to. I tried distracting myself. I cleaned the dishes, folded laundry, answered a few emails. Nothing worked. That uneasy feeling refused to leave. Jazz. Around 10:30 my phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't Daniel, it was Mia, my oldest friend. She rarely called at night. When I answered, she didn't even say hello. Emma, where are you? I'm home. She went silent, a long, uncomfortable silence. Then she asked a question that made my stomach tighten. Are you alone? My heart skipped yes. Another silence. Jazz. I could hear traffic in the background. People talking. Then she took a deep breath. I don't know if I should tell you this. Whenever someone starts a sentence that way, your life is about to change. I laughed nervously. What happened? She hesitated. I think I just saw Daniel. For a moment I smiled. So, he told me he's working. I know what he told you. Her voice became quieter. But he isn't at work. The room suddenly felt colder. What do you mean? I saw him leaving a restaurant. With clients? She didn't answer. Mia? He wasn't alone. Jazz. Every heartbeat echoed inside my ears. My fingers tightened around the phone. I'm sure there's an explanation. Those were the exact words I used. Not because I believed them, because I needed to, he whispered gently. I wish there was. I closed my eyes. No, I'm sorry. No. I kept repeating that single word like it could erase reality. No, no, no. Finally, Jazz. I forced myself to ask the question I was terrified to hear answered. Who was he with? The silence lasted only 2 seconds, but it felt like forever. A woman. My entire body froze. Jazz. I wanted to ask what she looked like. Whether they were talking. whether they smiled, whether they touched each other. But I couldn't, because deep inside, I already knew the answers. Gaz. I thanked Mia for calling and ended the conversation. Then I sat on the living room floor. I don't remember how long I stayed there. 5 minutes, maybe 30. Time had stopped making sense. Gaz. I kept staring at the front door. Part of me wanted Daniel to walk in and prove everything wrong, to laugh, to explain, to tell me Mia had simply misunderstood. But another part, Gaz, the quiet part I had ignored for months, already knew. Around midnight, I heard keys turning in the lock. Daniel stepped inside wearing the same grey jacket he'd left in that morning. Gaz. He smiled when he saw me. "You're still awake?" His voice sounded normal, too normal, as if nothing had happened, as if my world hadn't just cracked open. He leaned over to kiss my forehead. Gaz. For the first time in 3 years, I stepped back. Confusion crossed his face. "What's wrong?" I looked into his eyes, really looked, reaching for the man I had fallen in love with. Gaz. Searching for honesty, reaching for guilt. Instead, I saw someone who had become very good at pretending. He asked again, "Emma, what's going on?" I wanted to scream. I wanted to cry. Gaz. I wanted to demand the truth. Instead, I simply asked, "How was your meeting?" Without hesitation, he smiled. "It went great." That answer changed everything, because in that exact moment, Gaz, I realized the woman I had become wasn't just dating someone who could lie. I was living with someone who could look into my eyes, see my love, and still choose deception. Gaz. What I didn't know yet was that this lie was only the beginning. The truth waiting behind it was far more painful than I could imagine. And when it finally came to light, Gaz, it wouldn't just change his life, it would change mine forever. People often ask how someone ends up staying with a person who lies. The truth is, lies rarely arrive all at once, Gaz. They begin as tiny cracks, small enough to ignore, easy enough to explain away. By the time those cracks become impossible to miss, Gaz, you've already built your life around the person standing on the other side. When I first met Daniel, he didn't look like someone who would break my trust, Gaz. He looked like the kind of man every romantic story promises. We met on a rainy Tuesday afternoon at a neighborhood bookstore. I had ducked inside to escape the weather, shaking drops of rain from my jacket, while trying to decide between 2 novels. He reached for the same book at the exact moment I did. "I'm guessing you have good taste," he joked with an easy smile. I laughed. "No," I replied. "I'm just terrible at making decisions." That simple conversation lasted nearly an hour. We talked about books, travel, music, childhood dreams, jazz, and the places we hoped to see someday. It felt effortless, as though we'd known each other much longer than a few minutes. Before I left, he asked if he could buy me coffee. I almost said no, Jazz. I had promised myself I would stop rushing into relationships after my last heartbreak, but something about him felt safe. At least, that's what I believe, Jazz. The first year together was everything I thought love was supposed to be. He remembered little things, how I liked cinnamon in my coffee, how thunderstorms made it hard for me to sleep, Jazz, how I always cried during happy endings in movies. He celebrated every achievement, no matter how small. When I earned a promotion at work, he surprised me with flowers waiting at my apartment door, Jazz. When I doubted myself, he reminded me how capable I was. He wasn't perfect, no one is, but he made me feel chosen. And when someone makes you feel chosen, you rarely stop to wonder if they'll one day choose someone else. My friends loved him. My parents welcomed him like family. Even Mia, who had always been protective of me, Jazz, admitted he seemed different from the men I'd dated before. "You finally found someone who deserves you," she told me one evening. I smiled. "I think so too." Looking back, Jazz, I wonder if we were all seeing the version of Daniel he wanted us to see. Because people who are skilled at hiding the truth often become experts at creating the perfect image. For a long time, Gaz, I believed that image, maybe because I wanted to, maybe because believing it was easier than questioning everything we'd built together. As our relationship grew, so did our plans, Gaz. We talked about buying a house, starting a family, growing old together. We filled notebooks with vacation ideas and laughed about the kind of grandparents we'd someday become, Gaz. Those conversations felt real. That's what made everything hurt so much later, not because they were fake, Gaz, but because I never knew which parts of our future he truly believed in, and which parts were simply words he knew I wanted to hear. The first real change came so slowly that I almost missed it, Gaz. He started staying late at work. At first it was once a week, then twice. Soon it became almost every evening. Whenever I asked if everything was okay, he'd sigh, loosen his tie, Gaz, and tell me the company was under pressure. "We're trying to land a huge client," he explained. "I'll make it up to you." And he usually did. A weekend getaway, a thoughtful gift, Gaz. A handwritten note left beside my morning coffee. Those gestures made it easy to ignore the growing distance between us. I didn't realize that love isn't measured only by grand moments, Gaz. Sometimes it's measured by presence, by honesty, by showing up when no one's watching. Those were the things quietly disappearing from our relationship. I just wasn't ready to admit it yet, Gaz. There are moments in life that divide everything into two parts. The life you believed you were living, and the life you discover was real all along. For me, Gaz, that moment arrived on an ordinary Tuesday morning. Daniel had left for work earlier than usual. He rushed through breakfast, barely touched his coffee, kissed my forehead, Gaz, and hurried toward the front door. "I'm already late," he called as he grabbed his keys. "See you tonight." The door closed behind him. A few seconds later, I heard his car pull away, Gaz. I sighed and started cleaning the kitchen. The apartment felt strangely quiet, almost too quiet. As I picked up his coffee mug, I noticed something sitting on the dining table. His laptop, Gaz. Daniel never forgot his laptop. Never. His entire job depended on it. I smiled to myself. He's definitely going to call in 5 minutes, Gaz. I placed it carefully on the table and continued with my morning. 10 minutes passed, then 15, no call, no message. I reached for my phone, thinking I'd remind him. Before I could unlock it, Gaz, the laptop lit up with a notification. I wasn't trying to snoop. In fact, I looked away at first. But another notification appeared. Then another. The screen wasn't locked, Gaz. Only a small preview appeared in the corner. One sentence. Just one. "I missed last night already." My heart skipped. I stared at the words, hoping I had misunderstood. Maybe it was a coworker, Gaz. Maybe someone had sent the message by mistake. There had to be a reasonable explanation, didn't there? I took a slow breath. "No," I whispered to myself. "Don't assume. Trust, Gaz." That was what healthy relationships were built on. Trust meant giving someone the benefit of the doubt. So I stepped away from the laptop. I walked into the living room. I tried reading a book, Gaz. 5 minutes later, I realized I had read the same sentence 6 times. The message kept replaying in my mind. "I missed last night already." Last night, Daniel had told me he was working late, Gaz. My chest tightened. I stood up and paced across the apartment. Every instinct told me to ignore it. Every instinct also told me something was terribly wrong. Those two voices fought inside my head, Gaz. One begged me to trust the man I loved. The other begged me to trust myself. For months I had chosen him over my own instincts. This time, I wasn't sure I could. I walked back toward the table, Gaz. My hands trembled, not because I wanted to invade his privacy, because I was terrified of what I might find. The laptop screen had gone dark. I touched the trackpad. The display came back to life, Gaz. The messaging application was still open. I told myself I would only look long enough to identify the sender. Nothing more. The conversation was already on the screen. Gaz. The name at the top wasn't familiar, just one initial. The most recent message read, "I wish mornings didn't have to end so quickly." Below it, Daniel had replied, "Soon we won't have to hide, Gaz." I stopped breathing. The room blurred. I blinked several times, hoping the words would somehow change. They didn't. There were dozens of messages above them. Pictures, inside jokes, plans, Gaz. Conversations stretching back for months. Months while I had been cooking dinners, planning vacations, wondering why he seemed distant. He had been building another life, not by accident, Gaz. Not during one moment of weakness, day after day, choice after choice, lie after lie. I scrolled farther. Each message answered a question I had been asking myself for weeks. Why he came home late, Gaz. Why he smiled at his phone. Why he seemed emotionally absent even when sitting beside me. The answers had been there all along. I simply hadn't known where to look, Gaz. Then I found something that hurt even more. One message from Daniel said, "She still believes every excuse." I stared at those words for what felt like forever. She, that was me, not Emma, Gaz. Not the woman he'd promised forever. Just she. Someone easy to fool, someone predictable. Someone who trusted him enough to stop asking questions. Tears filled my eyes. But strangely, Gaz, I didn't cry. Not yet. The pain was too deep for tears. It felt like every memory we'd shared was being rewritten in front of me. Every anniversary, every birthday, every promise. Gaz. I wondered how many times he'd looked into my eyes after sending those messages. How many times he'd held my hand while thinking about someone else. The hardest part wasn't realizing he'd lied, Gaz. It was realizing how calmly he'd done it. There was no guilt in those conversations, no hesitation, only confidence that I'd never discover the truth. He had underestimated one thing, Gaz. The truth has a way of finding the light, even when someone tries desperately to keep it hidden. I closed the laptop. The apartment was silent again, Gaz. But I wasn't the same woman who had stood in that kitchen 20 minutes earlier. Something inside me had shifted. The heartbreak was real. The disappointment was overwhelming. Yet beneath all of it, Gaz, a quiet determination began to grow. For months I had doubted myself. I had questioned my instincts. I had blamed my own imagination. Now I knew I wasn't imagining anything. The betrayal was real, Gaz. The only question left was this: what would I do with the truth? I looked around the apartment we had built together. Every photograph, every piece of furniture, Gaz. Every shared dream suddenly felt unfamiliar. I realized I had two choices. I could confront him immediately, fueled by anger and heartbreak, or I could stay calm long enough to understand the full story, Gaz. For the first time in months, I chose myself, and that decision would change everything that followed. There's something strange about learning the truth. Once you see it, Gaz, you can never go back to the comfort of not knowing. The apartment looked exactly the same. The framed photos still hung on the walls. His shoes were still beside the front door, Gaz. His favorite mug was still drying on the kitchen rack. Nothing around me had changed, but everything inside me had. For hours, I sat on the couch, replaying every message I had seen on Daniel's laptop, Gaz. I wasn't searching for excuses anymore. I wasn't trying to convince myself there had been a misunderstanding. The truth had already answered every question I had been too afraid to ask, Gaz. The only thing left was deciding what to do next. When Daniel came home that evening, he greeted me with the same warm smile he always wore. "Hey," he said, hanging his jacket by the door. "Long day, Gaz." I forced a smile, mine too. It felt unnatural, not because I couldn't pretend, because I suddenly realized how exhausting pretending really was. He walked into the kitchen, opened the refrigerator door and frowned. No dinner tonight? Normally that question would have made me feel guilty. This time it made me feel something else, curiosity. Gaz. How could someone who had spent months lying to me still expect everything to feel normal? I wasn't feeling well, I answered quietly. His expression changed instantly. Gaz. He stepped closer and placed the back of his hand against my forehead. You should have called me. The concern in his voice sounded convincing, too convincing. Gaz. If I hadn't seen those messages that morning, I might have believed every word. I'm okay, I said, taking a small step back. He nodded, but for just a second I caught something unusual in his eyes. Gaz. Not worry, relief, almost as if he was checking whether I knew something, whether his carefully built world was still standing. We ordered takeout that night. The conversation was light, work, traffic. Gaz. A funny story from one of his co-workers. He laughed. I smiled when I was supposed to, but inside I was listening differently. Every sentence felt like a puzzle. Every answer felt rehearsed. Gaz. Then his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen for less than a second before flipping it over. The movement was quick, automatic, the kind of habit people develop after doing the same thing many times. Everything okay? I asked. He didn't hesitate. Just work. Work, that word again. It had become the shield protecting every lie. A few minutes later, his phone buzzed once more. Then again. Gaz. 3 messages in less than 5 minutes. He ignored them, but I noticed his foot tapping nervously beneath the table. He wasn't relaxed anymore. Neither was I. Later that evening, Gaz. While we watched television, he excused himself to take a phone call. I'll be right back. Instead of stepping into another room, Gaz. He walked onto the balcony and quietly closed the sliding door behind him. I couldn't hear his words, but I could see him. He smiled. He laughed. Gaz. He ran a hand through his hair the way he always did when he was flirting. That simple gesture hurt more than I expected, because it wasn't new. I'd seen him do it with me years earlier. Gaz. Now someone else was getting that version of him. When he returned inside, he looked completely relaxed. Everything all right? I asked. Yeah, what was the call about? He shrugged. My manager, Gaz. Another lie. He answered too quickly. Almost before I finished asking, I simply nodded. The old me would have accepted the explanation without another thought. The new me noticed everything. Gaz. The speed of his answer, the way he avoided eye contact, the tiny pause before changing the subject. Once trust is broken, the smallest details begin to speak louder than words. Over the next week, Gaz, I stopped confronting him. Instead, I started observing, not because I wanted revenge, because I needed certainty. Every morning he left 15 minutes earlier than usual, Gaz. Every evening he came home later. His phone never left his pocket. Even while showering, even while sleeping. Sometimes he smiled at messages before quickly locking the screen. Gaz. Sometimes he walked outside to answer calls. Sometimes he invented stories so ordinary they almost sounded believable. Traffic deadlines, unexpected meetings, killant dinners. The excuses kept changing. Gaz. But the pattern never did. One Friday evening, he announced another late meeting. I probably won't be home until after 10. I smiled politely. No problem. He kissed my cheek and left. Gaz. I waited exactly 5 minutes before looking through the living room window. Instead of driving toward the business district, his car turned in the opposite direction. Gaz. That was the moment I stopped searching for hope. Hope had kept me trapped for months. Facts were finally setting me free. I no longer needed another explanation. I needed a plan. Gaz. Because if Daniel had spent months carefully building his lies, then I would take my time uncovering the truth. Not out of anger, not to humiliate him. Gaz. But because I deserved to know the full story before deciding how my own would end. That night, as I sat alone in the quiet apartment, I realized something important. Gaz, the woman who had cried on the living room floor just days earlier, was slowly disappearing. In her place stood someone calmer, someone stronger. Gaz. Someone who finally understood that betrayal doesn't define your worth. It reveals the character of the person who chose to betray you. And although Daniel still believed he was in control, Gaz, he had no idea that the balance had already shifted for the first time since our relationship began. I wasn't following his story anymore. I was writing my own, and soon, Gaz, the truth he had hidden so carefully would begin to unravel in ways he never expected. People think revenge begins with anger. Mine didn't. It began with peace. Gaz. Not the kind of peace that comes after everything is fixed. The quiet that settled over me was different. It came from finally accepting a truth I had spent months trying to avoid. Gaz. Daniel wasn't going to wake up one morning and become the man I remembered. He wasn't trapped in a misunderstanding. He wasn't confused. He wasn't accidentally hurting me. Every lie he told was a choice. Gaz. And once I accepted that, something inside me became surprisingly calm. The tears stopped, not because I had stopped hurting, because I had stopped hoping that he would change. That weekend, Gaz, I woke before sunrise. For the first time in days, I opened the curtains instead of hiding from the morning light. The city was quiet. Cars moved slowly along the streets below. Gaz. And the first rays of sunlight reflected off the windows of nearby buildings. I wrapped my hands around a cup of coffee and asked myself a question that changed everything. Gaz, what do I want my life to look like a year from now? For a long time, every answer I had ever given included Daniel now. I forced myself to imagine a future that didn't. At first, it felt impossible. Gaz. Then, strangely, it felt freeing. I realized something that embarrassed me. Somewhere along the way, I had built my entire future around someone else's promises. Gaz. I had postponed dreams because they didn't fit our plans. I had turned down a job opportunity in another city because Daniel said we were building a life here together. Gaz. I had delayed starting my own small business because he believed it was too risky. At the time, I thought those decisions proved commitment. Now, Gaz, they looked more like sacrifices I had quietly made without noticing how much they were costing me. I pulled an old notebook from a drawer. The pages were almost empty. Gaz. It was supposed to become my business journal years ago. Instead, it had collected dust. I opened to the first blank page and wrote 3 simple words. My new beginning. That title wasn't about revenge. Gaz. It was about reclaiming the woman I had slowly stopped becoming. Over the next few hours, I made lists, skills I wanted to improve, places I wanted to visit, goals I had abandoned. Gaz. People I wanted back in my life. For the first time in months, my future felt larger than my heartbreak. That afternoon, Mia came over the moment she saw me. She wrapped me in a hug. I've been worried about you, she admitted. I know. She stepped back and studied my face. You've changed, I smiled faintly. I think I'm finally seeing things clearly. We spent hours talking. Gaz. Not just about Daniel, about me. She reminded me of things I had almost forgotten. The woman who once dreamed of opening her own design studio. The woman who loved photography. Gaz. The woman who laughed loudly without worrying who might judge her. You disappeared a little, Mia said gently. I know you're coming back. I looked out the window. No, she frowned. Gaz. I'm not coming back. I'm becoming someone stronger. She smiled. That's even better. Later that evening, Daniel came home carrying flowers. It wasn't our anniversary. It wasn't my birthday. Gaz. There was no special occasion, just flowers. Months earlier, that gesture would have melted my heart. Now, I couldn't stop wondering what he was trying to hide. They're beautiful, I said politely. Gaz. He smiled with obvious relief. I figured you deserved something nice. Deserved, the word echoed in my mind. If only he knew what I truly deserved. We ate dinner together. He talked about work, Gaz. A demanding client, unexpected deadlines, the same familiar stories. I listened carefully, not because I believed him anymore, but because I noticed how confidently he told each lie. Gaz. He had rehearsed them so often they sounded effortless. When he asked about my day, I surprised him. I started planning my future. His fork paused halfway to his mouth. Oh, yeah, I've been thinking about opening my own business. For the first time in weeks, his smile faded. Now, why not? He forced a laugh. That's a big decision. I've had plenty of time to think, Gaz. He nodded slowly but quickly changed the subject. It was subtle. Most people would have missed it. I didn't. For years, Daniel had encouraged my dreams, as long as they depended on him, Gaz. The moment I spoke about building something for myself, independent of him, he became uncomfortable. That reaction told me more than any argument ever could. He hadn't just wanted my love, Gaz. He had grown comfortable with my dependence. But that version of me no longer existed. That night, after he fell asleep, I quietly opened my notebook again. Beneath my list of goals, Gaz, I added another sentence. Never build your future on someone else's promises. I stared at those words for a long time. They weren't written out of bitterness, Gaz. They were written out of wisdom earned the hard way. As the days passed, I became more intentional. I met with an old mentor about restarting my business plans. I updated my resume, Gaz. I organized my finances. I opened a new savings account in my own name. Each small step gave me a little more confidence. Daniel noticed the changes. You seem different lately, he said one evening. I am. You've been happier. I smiled. I've been honest with myself. He laughed, assuming I meant work stress or personal growth. He had no idea those words carried a much deeper meaning. For months, Gaz. He believed he was writing the story of our relationship. He thought he controlled the truth. He thought he controlled me, Gaz. What he didn't realize was that every lie had quietly pushed me toward a life where I no longer needed his approval, his excuses, or his promises. I wasn't planning revenge anymore, Gaz. I was planning freedom. And sometimes, the most unforgettable revenge isn't watching someone lose everything. It's letting them realize they lost someone who finally remembered their own worth, Gaz. The day that realization reached Daniel was closer than he could possibly imagine.